Chancy does a little looking about. Chancy the Crow is a wise fellow. He is one of the smartest and wisest of all the little people in the Green Forest and on the Green Meadows. Everybody knows it. And because of this, all his neighbors have a great deal of respect for him, in spite of his harmful ways. Of course, Chauncey had noticed that Johnny Chuck had dug his house deeper than usual and had stuffed himself until he was fatter than ever before. He had noticed that Jerry Muskrat was making the walls of his house thicker than in other years, and that Paddy the Beaver was doing the same thing to his house. There is very little that escapes the sharp eyes of Chancy the Crow. He had guessed what these things meant. "They think we are going to have a long, hard, cold winter," said Chancy to himself. "Perhaps they know, but I want to see some signs of it for myself. They may be only guessing. Anybody can do that, and no one guess is as good as another." Then he found Mr. and Mrs. Quack, the mallard ducks, and their children in the pond of Paddy the Beaver, and remembered that they never had come down from their home in the far north as early in this. Excuse me. I'm going to start that paragraph again. Then he found Mr. and Mrs. Quack, the mallard ducks, and their children in the pond of Paddy the Beaver, and remembered that they never had come down from their home in the far north as early in the fall as this. Mrs. Quack explained that the cold weather had already started south, and so they had started earlier to keep well ahead of it. Looks as if there may be something in this idea of a long, hard, cold winter, thought Chancy, but perhaps the quacks are only guessing too. I wouldn't take their word for it, any more than I would the word of Johnny Chuck, or Jerry Muskrat, or Paddy the Beaver. I'll look about a little. So, after warning the quacks to remain in the pond of Paddy the Beaver so they would be safe, Chancy told them goodbye and flew away. He headed straight for the Green Meadows and Farmer Brown's cornfield. A little of that yellow corn would make a good breakfast. When he reached the cornfield, Chancy perched on top of a shock of corn, for it already had been cut and was ready to be carried up to Farmer Brown's barn. For a few minutes he sat there silent and still, but all the time his sharp eyes were making sure that no enemy was hiding behind one of those brown shocks. When he was quite certain that things were as safe as they seemed, he picked out a plump ear of corn and began to tear open the husks so as to get at the yellow grains. "Seems to me these husks are unusually thick," muttered Chancy, as he tore at them with his stout bill. "Don't remember ever having seen them as thick as these. Wonder if it just happens to be so on this ear." Then, as a sudden thought popped into his head, he left that ear and went to another. The husks on this were as thick as those on the first. He flew to another shock and found the husks were there just the same. He tried a third shock with the same result. "Huh, they are all alike," said he. Then he looked thoughtful, and for a few minutes he sat perfectly still, like a statue. "They are right," said he at last. "Yes, sir, they are right." Of course he meant Johnny Chuck and Jerry Muskrat and Paddy the Beaver and the hard, cold winter. Oh, I skipped a line. Of course he meant Johnny Chuck and Jerry Muskrat and Paddy the Beaver and the quacks. I don't know how they know it, but they are right. We are going to have a long, hard, cold winter. I know it myself now. I've found a sign. Old Mother Nature has wrapped this corn in extra thick husks, and of course she has done it to protect it. She doesn't do things without a reason. We are going to have a cold winter, or my name isn't Chancy the Crow.